Hi, welcome to part 5 in our studies of Asian art. In our last segment, we started looking at religious architecture in India and Cambodia. We had just finished up looking at the Great Stupa of Sanchi. In this segment, we're going to be looking at Hindu temple architecture. We're going to start by looking closely at this image in front of you, which is a relief sculpture on the northwest side exterior wall of Lakshmana Temple, which we'll look at more closely. So when we look at this image, we see an elegant woman, and she walks barefoot along a path accompanied by an attendant. She steps on a thorn and turns adeptly, bending her left leg, twisting her body and arching her back to point out the thorn and ask her attendant's help in removing it. As she turns, the viewer sees her face. It is round like the moon, with a slender nose, plump lips, arched eyebrows, and eyes shaped like lotus petals. While her right hand points to the thorn in her foot, her left hand raises in a gesture of reassurance. Images of beautiful women like this one from the northwest exterior wall of Lakshmana Temple in India have captivated viewers for centuries. Depicting idealized female beauty was important for temple architecture and considered auspicious, even protective. Texts written for temple buildings or builders described different types of women to include within a temple's sculptural program or decorative program, and emphasized their role as symbols of fertility, growth, and prosperity. Additionally, images of loving couples, known as Mathuna, literally the state of being a couple, appeared on the Lakshmana temple as symbols of divine union and moksha, the final release from samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. The temple at Khajuraho, I can't pronounce it, um, including the Lakshmana temple, have become famous for these amorous and kind of lusty images of couples, some of which graphically depict figures engaged in sexual intercourse. These erotic images were not intended to be titillating or provocative, but instead serve ritual and symbolic functions significant to the builders and devotees of these Hindu temples. The Lakshmana temple was the first of several temples built by the Chandela king in the newly created capital of Khajuraho. I guess that's how you pronounce it. Between the 10th and 13th centuries, the Chandelas patronized artists, poets, and performers and built irrigation systems, palaces, and numerous temples out of sandstone. At one time, over 80 temples existed at this site, including several Hindu temples dedicated to the gods Shiva, Vishnu, and Surya. There were also temples built to honor the divine teachers of Jainism, an ancient Indian religion. Approximately 30 temples remain at Khajuraho today. The original patron of the Lakshmana temple was a leader of the Chandela clan, Yashovarman, who gained control over territories in the Budelhand region of central India that was once part of the larger Pratihara dynasty. Yashovarman sought to build a temple to legitimize his rule over these territories, though he died before it was finished. His son Danga completed the work and dedicated the temple in 954 CE. The central deity at the Lakshmana temple is an image of Vishnu in his three-headed form known as Vaikuntha, who sits inside the temple's inner womb chamber, also known as the Garbha Gira. This is an architectural feature at the heart of all Hindu temples, regardless of size or location. The womb chamber is the symbolic and physical core of the temple's shrine. It is dark, windowless, and designed for intimate, individualized worship of the divine, quite different from large congregational worshiping spaces that characterize many Christian churches and Muslim mosques. The Lakshmana Temple is an excellent example of Nagara-style Hindu temple architecture. In its most basic form, a Nagara temple consists of a shrine known as a vimana, essentially the shell of the womb chamber, and a flat-roofed entry port known as a mandapa. The shrine of Nagara temples include a base platform and a large superstructure known as a sikhara, meaning a mountain peak. Which viewers can see from a distance. The Lakshmana temple's superstructure appears like the many rising peaks of a mountain range. So here's a floor plan of Lakshmana temple. Devotees approach the Lakshmana temple from the east and walk around its entirety, an activity known as circumambulation. So we saw this with the stupa, the great stupa at Sanchi. They begin walking along the large plinth of the temple base, moving in a clockwise direction starting from the left of the stairs. Sculpture friezes along the plinth depict images of daily life, love, and war, and many recall historical events of the Chandela period. Devotees then climb the stair of the plinth and encounter another set of images, including deities sculpted within niches on the exterior wall of the temple. In one niche, the elephant-headed Ganesh appears. His presence suggests that devotees are moving in the correct direction of the circumambulation, as Ganesh is a god typically worshipped at the start of things. Other sculpted forms appear nearby in lively, active postures, swaying hips, bent arms, and tilted head, which create a dramatic triple bend. And this is the contrapposto pose. All carved in, this is sort of a contrapposto pose that is about how weight is balanced and shifted in the human form. We'll talk a lot about this when we get into Greek art. So this is a version of Indian contrapposto. It's very dynamic, lots of tension, and it's very dramatic. So all of these are carved in deep relief, emphasizing their three-dimensionality. It is here specifically on the exterior juncture wall between the vimana and the mandapa. And I have an article that you guys are going to read that talk about the different deities related to Hinduism as well. We're really going to be focusing on the god Shiva, but we'll look at some other ones as well to give you a taste. It is here, specifically on the exterior juncture wall between the vimana and the mandapa, where devotees encounter erotic images of couples embraced in sexual union. This place of architecture juncture serves a symbolic function as the joining of the vimana and the mandapa, accentuated by the depiction of joined, and that's in apostrophes, couples. Four smaller subsidiary shrines sit at each corner of the plinth. These shrines appear like miniature temples with their own vimanas, sikharas, and mandapas, and womb chambers with images of deities. Originally, other forms or avatars of Vishnu. Following circumambulation of the exterior of the temple, devotees encounter three mandapas, which prepare them for entering the vimana. Each mandapa has a pyramid-shaped roof that increases in size as devotees move from east to west. So let me go back to that diagram here, and then you can kind of look here. So here are the three mandapas. And then the vimana is the exterior space. So often when I show these images, students are often very shocked, that this would be, couples engaged in sexual intercourse would be a decorative program for a sacred temple. But Hindus looked at sex and the body very differently than Christians did. So when you see these examples of couples interacting, it's meant to be a symbol of spiritual love and spiritual ecstasy, and that's how they view it. Very different than Western sort of Christian ideas, where a lot of times the body and sex is something to be viewed as shameful. Quite the opposite with some some aspects of Hinduism. Once devotees pass through the third and final mandapa, they find an enclosed passage along the wall of the shrine, allowing them to circumambulate the sacred structure in a clockwise direction. The act of circumambulation of moving around the various components of the temple allowed devotees to physically experience this sacred space, with it the body of the divine. So here you can see some devotees right now interacting with the space. So again, this idea of sacred space is a theme that we're going to continue to explore throughout this course. And so make note of the differences between different cultures. And obviously, when we get a few more under our belt, we'll kind of compare and contrast different sacred spaces from different cultures and time periods. All right, so this is our next temple that we're going to be looking at. This is an aerial view of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Angkor Wat in Siem Reap, Cambodia, is the largest religious monument in the world. Angkor Wat, translated from Khmer, the official language of Cambodia, literally means city temple. As far as names go, this is as generic as it gets. Angkor Wat was not the original name given to the temple when it was built in the 12th century. We have little knowledge of how this temple was referred to during the time of its use, as there are no exact texts or inscriptions that mention the temple by name. This is quite incredible if we consider the fact that Angkor Wat is the greatest religious construction project in Southeast Asia. A possible reason why the temple's original name may have never been documented is that it was such an important and famous monument that there was no need to refer to it by its name. We have several references to the king who built the temple, King Suryavarman, and events that took place at the temple, but no mention of its name. So here's a view of Angkor Wat. Now don't get it confused, because it does look very similar to Lakshmana Temple, especially the mandapas here, so just be careful. Angkor Wat is dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, who is one of the three principal gods in the Hindu pantheon. Shiva and Brahma are the others. Among them, he is known as the protector. The major patron of Angkor Wat was King Suryavarman II, whose name translates as the protector of the sun. Many scholars believe that Angkor Wat was not only a temple dedicated to Vishnu, but that it was also intended to serve as the king's mausoleum in death. So here we have another structure, perhaps, trying to showcase the power and authority even after death of a ruler. Similar to the terracotta warriors that we looked at with China, the first emperor of Qin, but very different, very different subject matter, and two probably very different rulers. The construction of Angkor Wat likely began in the year 1116 CE, 3 years after King Suryavarman II came to the throne, with construction ending in 1150, shortly after the king's death. Evidence for these dates come in part from inscriptions, which are vague, but also from the architectural design and artistic style of the temple and its associated sculptures. The building of temples by Khmer kings was a means of legitimizing their claim to political office and also to lay claim to the protection and powers of the gods. Hindu temples are not a place for religious congregation. Instead, they are homes of the god. In order for a king to lay claim to his political office, he had prove that the god did not support his predecessor or his enemies. To this end, the king had to build the grandest temple palace for the gods, one that proved to be more lavish than any previous temple. So again, we always have this sort of rulers trying to outdo each other. In doing so, the king could make visible his ability to harness the energy and resources to construct the temple and assert that his temple was the only place that a god would consider residing on earth. The building of Angkor Wat was likely to have necessitated some 300,000 workers, which included architects, construction workers, masons, sculptors, and the servants to feed these workers. Construction of the site took over 30 years and was never completely finished. The site is built entirely out of stone, which is an incredible as a close examination of the temple demonstrates that almost every surface is treated and carved with narrative or decorative details. There are 1,200 square meters of carved bas-reliefs at Angkor Wat, representing 8 different Hindu stories. Perhaps the most important narrative represented at Angkor Wat is the churning of the ocean of milk, which depicts a story about the beginning of time and the creation of the universe. It is also a story about the victory of good over evil. In this story, Devas, and these are gods, are fighting with asuras, which are demons, in order to reclaim order and power for the gods who have lost it. In order to reclaim peace and order, the elixir of life, Amrita, it's spelled Amrita, needs to be released from the earth. However, the only way for the elixir to be released is for the gods and demons to first work together. To this end, both sides are aware that once the Amrita is released, there will be a battle to obtain it. The relief depicts the moment when the two sides are churning the ocean of milk. In the detail above, or the detail you see in front of you, you can see that the gods and demons are playing a sort of tug of war with the Naga, or serpent king, as the divine rope. The Naga is being spun on Mount Mandara, represented by Vishnu, who is in the center of the composition. Several things happen while the churning of the milk takes place. One event is that the foam from the churning produces apsaras, or celestial maidens, who are carved in relief throughout Angkor Wat. We see them here on either side of Vishnu, above the gods and above the gods and demons. So I think these are these maidens right here. Once the elixir is released, Indra, the Vedic god who is considered the king of all gods, is seen descending from heaven to catch it and save the world from the destruction of demons. So an aerial view of Angkor Wat demonstrates that the temple is made up of an expansive enclosure wall, which separates the sacred temple grounds from the protective moat that surrounds the entire complex. The moat is visible in the photograph. I think you can start to kind of see it right here, and that's usually like a trench filled with water around. A lot of castles, medieval castles, had moats. The temple proper is comprised of 3 galleries, a gallery is a passageway running along the length of the temple, with a central sanctuary marked by 5 stone towers. The 5 stone towers are intended to mimic the 5 mountain ranges of Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods, for both Hindus and Buddhists. The Temple Mountain as an architectural design was invented in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asian architects quite literally envisioned temples dedicated to Hindu gods on earth as a representation of Mount Meru. The galleries and the empty spaces that they create between one another and the moat are envisioned as the mountain ranges and oceans that surround Mount Meru. Mount Meru is not only home to the gods, it is also considered an axis mundi. We talked about this earlier. An axis mundi is a cosmic or world axis that connects heaven and earth. In designing Angkor Wat in this way, King Suryavarman II and his architects intended for the temple to serve as the supreme abode for Vishnu. Similarly, the symbolism of Angkor Wat serving as an axis mundi was intended to demonstrate that the Angkor's kingdom and the king's central place in the universe. In addition to envisioning Angkor Wat as Mount Meru on Earth, the temple's architects, of whom we know nothing about, also ingeniously designed the temple so that embedded in the temple's construction is a map of the cosmos. So it has a kind of a mandala, as well as a historical record of the temple's patron. So it actually kind of serves as a mandala. So the structure itself is kind of seen as like an actual sort of representation or expression of the cosmos. In 1181, Jayavarman VII became king and established a new capital, Angkor Thom. During his reign, the Cambodian kingdom spanned a huge area extending beyond the Minim Basin to the west. The Bayon inscription mentions the existence of 2 statues of divinities guarding the cities of Ratchaburi and Phetchaburi in Thailand, as far as the seacoast of Champa to the east, as far as the city of Sukhothai, and again, I'm so sorry, I'm butchering these names, which is supervised by Khmer functionaries in the north, all the way down to the southern sea. At the time, the Khmers were trading with China, India, and other countries of Asia Minor. King Yavarman II was greatly concerned with the well-being of his kingdom and wanted to turn it into an earthly paradise. The Ta Prohm inscription comments on this subject. He found satisfaction in the nectar of his religion. The Sakyamuni Buddhism of the greater vehicle, within which he identified a cult of deceased relatives with the characteristics of the compassionate Bodhisattva and Parjana Paramita. So basically, he's embracing Buddhism. With regards to the arts, the king was responsible for the construction of numerous temples in the Angkor region and in other provinces. So it's kind of it's a hard temple because it started off as a Hindu temple, but then later this ruler Jayavarman VII. I don't know if he converted to Buddhism, but he definitely was interested in Buddhism and had these 2 statues, which are supposed to be him represented like as a Buddha figure. Let me double check my notes. So yes, this is Jayavarman VII represented as Buddha. Just to give you a little bit more information, he was probably the most famous and powerful of the Khmer monarchs. He was heavily influenced by his 2 wives, who were his sisters. He married one after the other's death. He was devoted to Buddhism, although his monuments show mixtures of Buddhist and Hindu iconography. So again, this one can be a little bit confusing for some students because of that mixture of Buddhism and Hinduism. So here's a floor plan of Angkor Wat, and I wanted to get back to this idea of Angkor Wat as a mandala. According to the ancient Sanskrit and Khmer text, religious monuments, and specifically temples, must be organized in such a way that they are in harmony with the universe, meaning that the temple should be planned according to the rising sun and moon, in addition to symbolizing the recurrent time sequences of the days, months, and years. The central axis of these temples should be aligned with the planets, thus connecting the structure to the cosmos so that the temples become spiritual, political, cosmological, astronomical, and geophysical centers. They are, in other words, intended to represent microcosms of the universe and are organized as mandalas or diagrams of the universe. So, pretty intense. Angkor Wat today continues to play an important role in Cambodia, even though most of the population is now Buddhist. Since the 15th century, Buddhists have used the temple, and visitors today will see among thousands of visitors Buddhist monks and nuns who worship at the site. Angkor Wat has become an important symbol for the Cambodian nation. Today, the Cambodian flag has emblazoned on it the silhouette of Angkor Wat. So here you see an example of the flag. I wanted to go back and talk a little bit too about some structural components and architectural features related to Hindu temples. So one of the things that we really haven't talked about too much is the use of a corbelled arch. And so we see the influence by India and the use of corbelled vaulting with these sort of mountain-like towers that symbolize the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. So a corbelled arch or corbelled vaulting is an arch-like construction method that uses the architectural of corbelling to span a space or void in a structure, such as an entryway in a wall or as the span of a bridge. A corbelled vault uses this technique to support the superstructure of a building's roof. So here's a quick diagram of it. A corbelled vault is constructed by offsetting successive courses of stone at the spring lines of the wall so that they project towards the archway center from each supporting side until the courses meet at the apex of the archway, often capped with a flat stone or stones. For a corbelled vault covering the technique is extended into 3 dimensions along the lengths of 2 opposing walls. So this is kind of an expansion, a little bit more sophisticated than post and lintel construction that we looked at when we were looking at Stonehenge and prehistoric art. But like post and lintel, it's a way of expanding space, and so you'll come across this term again. A lot of Mayan architecture, you probably remember, used corbelled vaulting as well. Lakshmana Temple also incorporates this use of corbelled vaulting or corbelled roofs. You can see they kind of have a beehive quality. They also incorporated ashlar masonry, which is precisely fitted stones without the use of mortar, which we saw with Incan architecture, and we saw also with African architecture with the great enclosure of Zimbabwe. All right, so we're going to stop here. In our next segment, we're going to be looking at the kind of evolution of Buddhism. We're going to be looking at different representations of the Buddha, so stay tuned.